Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Jema Donahue? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anyone in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Jema Donahue was born in Berlin, Germany on October 24, 1985. Her father was in the military. She was the youngest of 3 children. Her family moved frequently when she was young, which limited her ability to form friendships. She described her family as close, like they only had each other to rely on. Jema said that she did not get away with a lot when she was young. Her parents were strict. The family moved to Mississippi in 1990 and eventually settled in Missouri. Jema was homeschooled from the 2nd grade to the 6th grade. When she was finally enrolled in public school, she realized that homeschooling had restricted important socialization opportunities. Her classmates were more sophisticated and worldly. In 1998, 13-year-old Jema was the victim of an assault of a sexual nature. The perpetrator was 21 years old. She asked her mother, who was named Margaret, not to report the crime to the police, but Margaret reported it anyway. The police were not really excited about pursuing the case, but Margaret insisted. The perpetrator was eventually convicted and sentenced to 120 days in prison. People in the community found out the details of the crime, which resulted in Jema being bullied. She ended up leaving the school district that she had been in. Jema once again felt isolated as Margaret became highly protective and restricted her contact with friends. At the age of 16, Jema became pregnant. She had a son named Benjamin. 3 years later, she had a daughter named Carmela. In 2007, Jema and her 2 children moved to Warrensburg, Missouri. Jema met a man named Jema Donahue through a mutual friend. He was in prison for manufacturing and distributing illegal substances. Jema allowed him to use her address so he could get released from prison, like the authorities wanted him to have a place to live before letting him go. This is referred to as a home plan. In the case of Jema, calling it a continued criminal plan would have been more accurate. Jema and Jema started having a romantic relationship. She believed that he was rehabilitated. Jema would watch Jema's children as she attended classes at the University of Central Missouri. After being together for 4 months, the police told Jema that her boyfriend was a well-known crack cocaine dealer. She told Jema to leave, but he choked her and told her the only way they would not be together is if he killed her. Jema remained in the relationship. In 2011, the couple married and moved to Pennsylvania. Jema continued to attack Jema on a regular basis. She left him in 2016 and moved into her parents' home in Knob Noster, Missouri. This is about an hour east of Kansas City, Missouri. Jema moved to Missouri as well and convinced Jema to continue their romance. He became involved in drugs again, and the violence escalated. Jema told Jema that he had nothing to lose. He would kill her and her children if necessary. At least this is what Jema was saying. Jema obtained a temporary restraining order in March of 2017. Before moving to the timeline of the crime, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Shortform. Shortform produces high-quality guides to nonfiction books. One can think of these guides as superpowered book summaries, offering comprehensive coverage of all the ideas in the books, as well as clever commentary and insightful analysis. The guides promote a deeper understanding of the topic and can help you acquire new insights about the content of the books. Shortform is the best way to learn ideas from all those books you've always wanted to read, and it facilitates learning at different levels. It's a great way to discover new books that you have been curious about. Shortform covers a number of topics. I tend to look at the topics of business, science, and technology. For example, I just read a summary of the pros and cons of salary transparency and the new laws which might be mandating it. Shortform publishes new book guides and articles every week, and subscribers get to vote on what books are covered. Get access to the world's best book guides at shortform.com/drgrande, and you'll receive 5 days unlimited access and an additional 20% discount on the annual subscription. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On April 14, 2017, Jema was alone in her parents' house. Here is her story about what happened next. Jema walked downstairs and discovered Javon standing in the family room. He grabbed her by the neck and dragged her upstairs. He locked the doors and windows and went downstairs. Jema joined him in the basement after he called her name. She walked into a basement bedroom and saw that he was holding a .22 caliber pistol. Javon pointed the weapon at her and pulled the trigger, but the gun malfunctioned. He hit Jema on the head with the gun and lost his grip on it. After the gun fell to the ground, Jema picked it up and pointed it at Javon. She told him to leave the house. Instead of leaving, Javon stepped toward Jema. At this point, she discharged the weapon. Javon was struck in the left shoulder. He grabbed Jema by the wrists and threw her around the room. Jema pulled the trigger 2 more times as he was throwing her around. She made it sound as though these were involuntary, like she pulled the trigger because of his movements. These 2 shots struck Javon as well. Javon landed on top of Jema and told her that they would die together. He placed his head up against Jema's head and pointed the gun at his left ear. Jema grabbed the grip of the pistol and pulled the trigger. Javon was shot in the head and died as a result. Jema crawled out from under his dead body right as her mother, Margaret, was arriving home. Jema encountered Margaret outside and told her that Javon was dead. Jema called 911, but then disconnected the call. The operator called back, and Margaret answered the phone. Jema was waving her hands and shaking her head no, as if she did not want Margaret to inform the police about what happened. Margaret told the operator that the call was a mistake. The operator told Margaret that the police would have to visit the house anyway. Margaret and Jema waited outside about 45 minutes for the police to arrive, but they never showed up. Margaret felt as though this was a turning point. She said to herself, "We can get away with this." Margaret helped Jema wrap the body in a tarp, remove it from the house, and clean the scene of the shooting. Jema gave a friend of hers named Ricky Armstrong $400 to rent equipment to bury the body on a property that was less than 20 miles away from where she lived. The disposal site, which was near Warrensburg, was well known for drug use. It was informally referred to as the farm. On April 22, 2017, the police started looking for Javon. They had received an anonymous tip indicating that Jema shot and killed him, and his body was buried at the farm. By interviewing people who lived on the farm, the police learned where Javon's body was buried, and they were told about Margaret's involvement. The police interviewed Margaret, and she promptly confessed. She was eventually convicted of abandonment of a corpse. She would later serve 30 days in jail. Jema was arrested, and she confessed to killing Javon. She was charged with a number of offenses, including murder. She pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Jema's defense was that she had battered woman syndrome. She was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, armed criminal action, unlawful use of a weapon, tampering with evidence, and abandonment of a corpse. Jema was sentenced to 10 years in prison on January 29, 2019. She will be eligible for parole in 2024. Now moving to my analysis. Some people are not happy with the verdict in this case. They believe that Jema should have been convicted of murder. Others believe that even voluntary manslaughter is too severe. Jema was innocent. She acted in self-defense. Let's take a look at the arguments both for and against the idea that Jema was guilty of murder, starting with the inculpatory factors. Jema's story about how the shooting took place does not make any sense. There are just too many questions that don't have good answers. Her story contains a series of unlikely events. Javon mysteriously showed up at her mother's residence and attacked her. How did he make entry into the house? After attacking her and dragging her upstairs, he went down to the basement and called for her. She walked down to where he was. Why didn't she simply run out of the house or call for help? Javon pointed a gun at her and pulled the trigger, but the gun malfunctioned. After striking her in the head with the gun, he dropped the pistol. she was able to pick it up and point it at him. Why was there now more distance between them? In one moment, Jevon was striking Jema in the head with the pistol. In the next moment, he was a few feet away again. Did he back up after dropping the gun? When Jevon lunged toward Jenna, she pulled the trigger, and now, perhaps magically, the pistol discharged. How did the malfunction get resolved? Was it resolved when Jevon hit Jema in the head with the pistol? After this, Jema fired the gun 2 more times while being shaken by Jevon. There is the sense that Jema was just trying to explain these 2 shots in some way. After the gun had been fired 3 times, Jevon simply gave up on life. His intent was now for both of them to die. Somehow, Jema managed to get the upper hand and once again pulled the trigger. This brings a conclusion to Jevon's life. In addition to all the questions that I mentioned, there's another major problem with this story. Jevon was shot 4 times. He was hit in his shoulder, his jaw, in the back of his head, and in his chin. Both the shot to the back of the head and the one to his chin were lethal. Jema made it sound as though the first shot hit him in the shoulder and the last shot struck him in the back of the head. This is difficult to believe. The shot underneath his chin would have killed him. What's more, the shot to his jaw rendered him unable to speak, yet Jema claimed that he was talking about how they would die together. In addition to the inculpatory factors connected to the shooting, Jema's actions afterward were problematic. She arranged for Jevon's body to be buried. Moving to the exculpatory factors, witnesses testified that Jevon had physically and verbally mistreated Jema for years. It appears as though Jevon was high on methamphetamine when he was killed. There was a restraining order in place against Jevon. He was not allowed to be anywhere near Jema. Jema called 911. She disconnected the call right away, but at least she considered an option that did not involve failing to report the crime. When considering all the evidence, do I think that Jema was guilty? I think that Jema was guilty of voluntary manslaughter. I don't think this was second-degree murder. Clearly, Jevon was dangerous, and Jema was trying to keep him away. By making his way into her residence, Jevon was really taking a chance. As I mentioned, Jema's defense was that she had battered woman syndrome, otherwise known as BWS. This is often conceptualized as a subcategory of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is known as PTSD. Some researchers argue that this conceptualization does not fully capture BWS because the trauma is ongoing. It is not post-trauma, it is current trauma. BWS features 6 symptoms: re-experiencing a battering as if it were reoccurring, even when it's not reoccurring; attempts to avoid the emotional impact of battering, like avoiding people and activities; hypervigilance; disrupted personal relationships; somatic concerns; and difficulties with intimacy. Proponents of using defense strategies based on BWS always seem to run into the same problem. What exactly do they want to change? It seems like they are seeking to add an extra level of permissible violence to the standard self-defense definition. Like they want to give a woman with BWS the ability to overreact based on having been mistreated. This goes against the traditional understanding of self-defense. For many years, it has been conceptualized as something which is confined to when a person is under imminent threat. Only the force necessary to end the threat is permitted. The BWS defense is looking to expand the power of the person with the syndrome. My problem with the idea of BWS as a defense in the case of Jema Donahue is that it does not explain her efforts to conceal the body or her disjointed story about how the shooting happened. If she had not behaved suspiciously, I think she could have made a pretty good argument for self-defense. I think that BWS can be used as a defense in certain situations, but deception is not something that it can be used to explain. Moving to my last question, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. I think that Jevon mistreated Jema. She was trapped in a cycle of violence with him. She knew that she needed to get away from him. However, she also believed that she loved him. She explained his bad behavior by suggesting that Jevon truly loved her, but he could only express his love through violence. There is no type of love that is expressed through violence. Jema was lying to herself. This is what she needed to believe. She also became fixated on the good memories she had with Jevon. She suggested that because the marriage was so terrible, the good memories stood out even more. Again, there's the sense that she was working hard to convince herself that the relationship had some good in it. She was holding on to hope. On the day of the shooting, Jevon came over uninvited. He somehow found his way into the house. Jema simply had enough of his bad behavior. She shot him in the back of the head, killing him. When his body collapsed to the ground, she shot him in the shoulder and the jaw. She then put the gun under his chin and fired one more time to make sure that he was dead. Jema was not sure what to do. She called 911 before quickly disconnecting. She was worried that the circumstances of the shooting looked a lot like a murder. Her concern was justified. She did not have a good explanation for firing the gun 4 times. Therefore, she conspired with her mother and a friend to dispose of the body. Any legitimate arguments that she could have made for self-defense were washed away by her deception. Now moving to my final thoughts. Jevon mistreated Jema for several years. He threatened and coerced her in order to achieve control. He was largely successful in this endeavor and seemed to maintain an incredible amount of power over Jema. Jevon once told Jema that the only way they would be apart is if he killed her. The problem for Jevon is that he forgot about one other way they could be separated. Jema exposed this logical error to him, but of course by that point, it was too late. Those are my thoughts in the case of Jema Donahue. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.